The full extent of crimes committed by those held in migrant hotels across the UK has been exposed in shocking investigations by The Sun and the Mail on Sunday.
Across the United Kingdom, a crisis is unfolding inside migrant hotels. A hidden world of crime, secrecy, and government mismanagement is now being dragged into the light. Investigations reveal that at least 1 in every 100 migrants housed in taxpayer-funded hotels has already faced court action. In just 6 months this year alone, hundreds of asylum seekers have appeared before magistrates charged with criminal offenses, from violent assaults to sexual crimes so disturbing that entire communities are now in revolt. These are not isolated incidents. Reports show at least 339 court cases linked to migrants living in hotels, a number that could easily be far higher because official records cover only about half of the facilities in operation. Among these cases are dozens of alleged rapes, sexual assaults, and violent offenses involving knives, imitation firearms, and organized theft. Behind the numbers are real victims: women, children, and communities whose safety has been compromised by a system that promised protection but instead delivered chaos.
Confronting details of the alleged crimes, including 29 sex crimes, including 7 alleged rapes, 1 proven incident of exposure, and 1 of attempting to engage in sexual communication with a child. A further 64 violence-related offences were recorded, including common assault, GBH, ABH, possessing a knife, and possessing an imitation firearm. And the Mail on Sunday concluded their own investigation into migrant hotels, garnering similar results. Writer Matt Goodwin summarised the findings, saying, "Truly shocking. 312 asylum seekers in Britain have been charged with 708 alleged criminal offences in 3 years." The Mail on Sunday studied asylum hotels and court documents and found 89 charges of assault, 51 charges of theft, 43 drug offences, 35 sexual assaults, 18 charges of rape, 18 of burglary, 16 of robbery, 5 attempted rapes. "We need to leave the ECHR, regain control of our borders, and deport all foreign criminals." This local resident, who lives close to a migrant hotel in Epping, Essex, doubled down on the findings, saying the women and children in his area need to be protected.
Locals in towns like Epping, Essex, describe life near these hotels as living next to a powder keg. Residents report groups of intoxicated men loitering outside shops, intimidation in public spaces, and frightening incidents in nearby forests. Families describe women being harassed and followed, and parents now fear letting their children walk to school. What began as a temporary humanitarian solution has become a permanent source of danger and resentment. The government has tried to reassure the public that these hotels are secure and that asylum seekers are vetted. Yet, as court records pile up, it's clear the system is overwhelmed, under-policed, and often blind to the criminal backgrounds of those it houses. In one case, a teenage girl was allegedly assaulted by a migrant only days after he arrived at his assigned hotel. In another, women reported being flashed and followed near school zones. For many, this is proof that risk assessments, if they were ever conducted, were woefully inadequate. These revelations have sparked a wave of protests across Britain. Parents and community leaders have begun to gather outside the hotels, demanding answers and accountability. In some towns, these demonstrations have turned tense, with police lines separating furious locals from the fortified hotel entrances. Protesters chant that their children are at risk, that their communities are being ignored, and that the government has lost control of its borders and its streets. The protests have also unleashed a wider debate about national security, immigration policy, and the meaning of sovereignty in the modern UK. Critics argue that the government has effectively imported crime and instability into peaceful communities under the guise of humanitarianism. Supporters of the residents inside the hotels insist that the majority are law-abiding and desperate to start a new life, but even they concede that the lack of transparency and security checks fuels distrust and anger. Compounding the crisis is a deep sense of double standards. Many British families are facing housing shortages, waiting lists for social services, and rising living costs. Yet hotels, once serving tourists, are now fully booked with government-funded accommodation for asylum seekers, complete with meals, welfare access, and legal representation. To locals, this feels like an insult. While citizens struggle, newcomers who arrived illegally appear to receive preferential treatment. Community leaders warn that tensions are approaching a breaking point. In several towns, parents have formed patrols and neighborhood watch groups to keep an eye on school routes. Some small businesses near the hotels report shoplifting, harassment of customers, and a visible decline in trade. For them, the government's refusal to act quickly has created not just a law and order crisis, but an economic one. At the heart of the anger lies a simple question: how did this happen? How could a government sworn to protect its citizens place hundreds of unvetted men into small towns without proper oversight, without consultation, and without accountability? Officials respond with bureaucratic language, processing centers, temporary accommodation, ongoing investigations. But for ordinary people, the words ring hollow. This situation is no longer confined to one town or one hotel. It is part of a pattern of failing to control illegal immigration, of ignoring warning signs, and of silencing those who speak up. The outrage in Epping is echoed in protests across the country. Residents in seaside towns, suburban neighborhoods, and rural counties all describe the same story: sudden arrivals, lack of transparency, rising crime, and official indifference. Analysts warn that if these patterns continue, Britain could see a cascade of social unrest reminiscent of crises in other parts of Europe. The longer officials dismiss local concerns as misinformation or far-right scare tactics, the deeper the divide between the political class and the public will grow. And as trust erodes, communities may begin taking matters into their own hands, a prospect that could lead to even greater instability. Behind every statistic is a human cost: the young girl allegedly assaulted on her way home from school, the shopkeeper robbed at knife point, the pensioner who no longer feels safe walking to the corner store. These are not abstract issues. They are the real-world consequences of policies made in distant offices by leaders who rarely experience the fallout themselves. And yet, amid this turmoil, there are also voices calling for balance. Some chaplains and social workers stationed at these hotels argue that not all residents should be punished for the crimes of a few. They warn that aggressive protests can cut off access for families and lawyers trying to support detainees, and that heavy police tactics risk escalating tensions rather than calming them. But even they agree on one point: the current system is broken, and communities cannot bear this burden indefinitely. As Britain enters a new phase of public anger over migrant hotels, the question is no longer whether the system can be reformed. It is whether the government has the will to protect its own citizens, restore the rule of law, and stop the cycle of secrecy and denial. In the next segment, we'll explore how the protests have escalated, what politicians are saying behind closed doors, and how the crisis has begun to reverberate across Europe.
They're using the courts against the British people. They even brazenly argued in court that the rights of illegal immigrants.
Tensions have exploded in Epping, Essex in the UK today after a group of concerned locals took to an asylum hotel to protest after a refugee was charged with sexually assaulting a 14-year-old schoolgirl.
Hi everybody, Councillor Jamie McIver here. So I'm outside the Home Office where I'm about to deliver a letter signed by the 3 Reform UK councillors in Ongar to call on the Home Secretary to immediately close the Bell Hotel in Epping and, of course, the Phoenix Hotel, which is close to Ongar. It is unacceptable that the people of Epping Forest should have to tolerate this level of fear and anxiety because of the behaviour of people living in the Bell Hotel.
By midsummer, the quiet unease surrounding migrant hotels had transformed into open defiance. From small villages to the outskirts of major cities, crowds began gathering at hotel gates, town squares, and local council offices. They carried homemade signs, chanted for accountability, and demanded that someone in power finally listen. What had been whispered in private kitchens and on local message boards was now shouted through megaphones. People feel abandoned by their leaders.
Anti-migrant protests in the UK have exploded once again, following the arrest of a migrant hotel resident on suspicion of assault. The Sun reported clashes between police and protesters outside the Britannia Hotel in London after law enforcement enacted Section 14 of the Public Order Act to move the demonstrators across the road from the hotel.
In Broadview, in towns outside Birmingham, in pockets of northern England, the pattern was the same. As soon as a new hotel contract was signed, locals would discover the change only after buses of new arrivals rolled up at night. Council members claimed they were given no warning. Police chiefs admitted they were under-resourced to handle potential disturbances. This secrecy fueled the perception that central government had gone rogue, imposing policies without consent or even consultation. Protests themselves evolved. At first, they resembled community meetings, older residents, worried parents, and a handful of activists holding placards. But as incidents at the hotels multiplied, assaults, thefts, or rumors of them, younger and more aggressive groups began to appear. Clashes with police grew inevitable. Videos circulated online of scuffles, arrests, and confrontations between residents and officials. Each clip poured more fuel on an already smoldering fire. Officials scrambled to frame the unrest as a temporary backlash or the work of a few extremists. Yet the size and diversity of the crowd suggested otherwise. Pensioners stood beside construction workers. Shopkeepers linked arms with local parents. This was no fringe movement. It was the mainstream, a cross-section of ordinary citizens, furious at being ignored. Inside Parliament, debates turned heated. Ministers publicly insisted that the majority of migrants in hotels pose no threat, while backbench MPs warned their own constituencies were reaching a breaking point. Internal memos leaked, showing that senior advisors had warned for months about the security risks of concentrated housing for asylum seekers. Still, contracts were renewed and more hotels were added to the system. Political leaders across Britain have tried to strike a balance between compassion and control. Some call for dramatically reducing hotel usage and opening new processing centers far from residential neighborhoods. Others argue for a tougher stance at the borders, including turning back small boats and tightening asylum eligibility. Yet behind the rhetoric, the machinery of government moves slowly, and communities on the ground see little change.
It's incredibly sad, but the UK has been so weak for so long on this issue. It's like they've rolled out the red carpet and now you want to pull it back and now you want to say stop coming, but it's too late. You know, it's like closing the stable after the horse has already left. You know, I think it's too late. I don't see a way without actually being, you know, more Donald Trump-like, kind of being meaner about this and being stronger about this, that you're going to shut this down. You know, you have to be out there on boats. You have to be turning away these boats. You have to be bringing these people, you know, locking them up if you have to. But it has to stop. And the only way you're going to stop it is to be tough. And I see Starmer, you know, I listen to him, I read what he says, and he's still dancing around the issue. He still doesn't actually understand what the problem is, I think. And so he can't solve it. If you can't understand the problem, you can't solve it. He still wants to be politically correct, I guess, on the world stage. He's still a globalist, and ultimately, that's the failure. I don't know if there's a way out of this for the UK anymore, and that worries.
The reaction from municipal leaders has been especially sharp. Mayors, council leaders, and police commissioners accuse central government of shifting costs and risks onto local authorities without providing resources. "We weren't consulted," says one council member from the Midlands. "We're told to make it work while our residents bear the consequences." That sense of betrayal from local politicians, traditionally allies of national parties, signals how deep the discontent has become. Meanwhile, national leaders face their own pressures. Polling shows immigration and border security surging as top voter concerns. Lawmakers from across the spectrum admit privately that they underestimated public anger, and some fear that ignoring it could spark a wave of political upsets in upcoming elections. Party strategists quietly discuss how to regain control of the narrative before it engulfs their campaigns. This turmoil has also emboldened critics of so-called sanctuary policies. For years, certain jurisdictions touted themselves as havens for migrants, regardless of legal status. But now those same policies are being blamed for enabling crime networks, human trafficking, and a black market in forged documents. Intelligence officials warn that without tighter screening, dangerous individuals can slip through, using hotel accommodation as cover for more serious activities.
Welcome to London. Sare dunya barbadi hai.
An illegal migrant racked up nearly 1 million views online with a step-by-step guide to crossing the channel on a small boat. A Sun probe has uncovered a series of videos that shows the internet influencer boasting from a 4-star Asylum hotel that it was his dream to come to the UK. Last night, Nigel Farage called the video an advert for crossing the channel. The man, known as Alexandra420 online, has 70,000 fans and detailed his perilous dinghy crossing in 8 different viral clips on TikTok.
One senior security source put it bluntly: "These are not walled compounds. People come and go. When you house hundreds of unvetted men in one place, you create an ideal environment for gangs, predators, and extremists to recruit." That warning echoes concerns long raised by police unions and border officers, many of whom say morale has cratered under the weight of unrealistic policies and public criticism. Yet the national conversation is not only about security, it's about fairness, the sense that the state's first obligation is to its own citizens. In countless interviews, residents voice the same complaint. If a British pensioner needs housing, they face years on a waiting list. But if a recent arrival crosses the channel illegally, they're placed in a hotel overnight. This perception, whether fully accurate or not, has become a powerful political force. Even some who once supported generous asylum policies are now questioning the system. Faith leaders, social workers, and local NGOs argue that mixing traumatized refugees with economic migrants, criminal elements, and unaccompanied men in a single facility creates inevitable tension. Without proper vetting, psychological screening, or supervision, they say the results are predictable: exploitation, violence, and public backlash.
کشور خوارتان نیست مادرتان نگاین کس فروش دوستایی که میخواین بین در این جای است زدنی جای است بخی بیا این تو چشم تنگ نباش کسش کشورت با بیت نیست که تقدر بخیل هستی درست زندگی کو انسان مور زندگی کو 4 تا رفیقت که می بگو بیا چون قدر بخیل هستی بخیل بودن با می خدا خوب نیست خود تو میبینی کس فروش که جان خدا در خطر میبرتیم.
As the debate intensifies, one truth is clear. Communities can only withstand so much uncertainty before trust begins to erode. How Britain chooses to respond, with reform, transparency, and enforcement, will decide not only the fate of these policies, but the very character of the nation itself.